At some point, ladies and gentlemen, our bodies will die and our spirit will transition to the other side. Now, what do you want your final story to be? And who do you want to be present during that transition? My name's Frank Zaccari, and this is Life Altering Events, and we're talking about near-death experiences today. We all want closure. Everyone wants closure. And in a perfect world, our last living moments will be peaceful, all debts will be over, all grievances will be done, and we'll be with our loved ones. But we don't live in a perfect world. There are many stories that were never told, and there are issues that were never resolved. Now we have COVID, 500,000 deaths in less than 1 year. No family is present. How will these stories be told? My guest today is Diane Wyzga, who wrote, I love this, she wrote this, some of the darkest moments in my life where the true way was wholly lost on me. A person or opportunity beckoned, and I said yes. And that's when the story changed. Now, Diane knows a great deal about working with people in transition, finding closure, and telling stories. Here's something about her. She was a registered nurse and an officer in the United States Navy, and a corporate businesswoman, a platform storyteller, a lawyer, a litigation consultant, a solopreneur, and there's more, story artist, wordsmith mentor, and a podcaster. This is one of the most incredibly busy and accomplished women you are ever going to find anywhere in the world. Diane, welcome.
I think my mother wrote that introduction, Frank. This is what happens when you're the firstborn daughter. You know, you got to do it all before the age of 13.
That's right.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here. I'm happy to be with you.
It's my pleasure. My pleasure. Diane, with all you've accomplished, tell the viewers, how'd you get here? What was your journey growing up?
You know, that is a uniquely serendipitous question, because yesterday I finished a very intensive week-long course, I guess for lack of a better word, with Mary Alice Arthur, who recently wrote and published the book 365 Alive, about your story. And there were upwards of 50 of us from around the world who gathered together for intensive webinars, and then we gathered together in story cafes so that we could break into small groups and talk about our stories. The idea being that we can shape the story that we came from. And so when you ask that question, the most important thing for me is, instead of going through the CV, to tell you that, like everyone else, I have a founding story. The story that you picked up when you were little and the giants told you that you couldn't do this, you couldn't do that, you weren't worth this, you weren't worth that, whatever. And you carry that founding story with you. And as you carried that founding story with you, it impressed itself upon you, and it determined in some ways the course of your life. And so what I would say in answer to your question is that, yes, I was molded in part by that founding story. So I'm the oldest of 7, grew up on the East Coast, Catholic school, Catholic church, and you can't get away from the social, political, religious influences that wove themselves into that founding story. Having said that, you bring with you your own skills, experiences, and traits that continue to shape that story within it. So within the founding story that you're in, you're bringing your own curiosity, your own sense of adventure, your own sense of possibility. And that, I think, is what works as a dance with the founding story, so that you can get to the place of some of these things that you claim as your own accomplishments.
And I love that. That's a good answer. We all have that story that shapes us sometimes for a very long time.
Yes. It does. And I think that that's part of what we'll be talking about more, that you carry that with you. And unless you're aware of what that founding story is, unless you want to pick it apart and make changes in it, it can influence who you live and how you live through the course of your life, which then shows up at death.
Exactly. Those are great. Diane, when we spoke on the phone, or on another Zoom, I guess we don't do phones anymore. Now we Zoom everything.
We Zoom in.
We had a conversation about stories where we have seen people transition from this life. And you had a story about your mother, which I thought was intriguing. Would you share that?
Yeah. Mom had been misdiagnosed with she had lymphoma, and she was misdiagnosed. And so the end months of her life went pretty fast until another doctor picked up what it was. And as a result, there was really no opportunity to tie up loose ends with her, in part because my dad didn't want to acknowledge what was going on. And that if we did talk about her pending death, if we did try to tie up loose ends, they called on you've heard the old term, don't think of the devil and he won't think of you.
Yes.
And so the idea was that if we talk about death, we're thinking about the devil. And if we think about as death, then that'll bring it on. Whereas if we don't talk about it, then maybe we'll be lucky and escape it. And of course, that's not what happens. So the week before she died, she slipped into a coma on a Monday. And of course, everyone came and flew in. And I was the last to arrive because the plane had gotten delayed in Dallas, Fort Worth because of their famous thunderstorms that happened in late summer. And when I arrived, the family had been with Mom most of the day. And by this time, it was getting on to night. And so they went down the hall to the family room, and my dad went home with my brothers. And I sat by Mom's bedside, and I brought some CDs with me, and I was playing those. And as a nurse, but just as a person, as you know, Frank, I have a deep belief that our loved ones hear us, whether they're in a coma, whether they're on the other side of the veil, they hear us. We can't, they don't stop hearing us because they're dead. They don't stop hearing us because they're in a coma. Just because they can't respond to us doesn't mean that our words, our feelings, our energy isn't getting through to them. And so sitting by Mom's bedside, I was sitting on her left side, and I was holding her hand. And I was just going back through the years as I remembered them, what she taught me, what I admired, some of the difficulties that we had and that were time to put down and put aside. And I got to a point where I was telling her that we would not forget, we would always remember. And as clear as I can see you sitting in your office, I felt her hand tighten on mine. It wasn't a grip, but it was enough that I could say, she heard that.
Right.
She heard that. And it was shortly thereafter, because she was already in the Cheyne-Stokes breathing, so you knew that the time was short. But it was shortly thereafter that she took that deep breath. And I remember thinking, because the hospital she was in was on a river, a beautiful river, and it's summertime, and I could just imagine her spirit leaving and going out the window and sailing up that river. But the minute she squeezed my hand, it was as if she was saying, now I know it's okay. My last child has made it in. The last one's gotten to the bedside. And now I know it's okay. It's okay. And the last thing I'll say about that is, so often, as I'm imagining you've experienced, family members hold on. They wait. They wait until everyone's there. They wait to hear the word. They want to know, is it okay? In fact, I think there's a story that you shared with me when we were Zooming in together.
Right. Right. It is so important for that closure. And my wife tells a story. Her dad was passing, and it was any moment, any moment, any moment. This went on for several days.
Yeah.
And the doctors came to the family, and there's 5 children, and her mom was still alive at the time. And they said, something is not unresolved here. And he's holding on to something. Find out what that something is and tell that story. And they all sat and talked, and so they decided, well, maybe because he was a protector, he was a World War II flyer and pilot, and that what's going to happen to my wife? And when they went in, all 5 of the children were now adults, and said, Mom's going to be okay. We're going to take care of Mom. It's okay. You don't have to worry. And he needed all 5, just like you said, all 5 had to come in and say those words. And he was kind of in and out of a coma, I was told, and he nodded his head. And then the nurses said, well, we need to do, if you would step outside for a moment here. And then he died because he didn't want anybody there when he died. He just wanted that closure. And you talk about stories so much, Diane. You're such a good storyteller. Why is it so important that we have those stories to carry on?
I think it's important on both sides. I think it is important that whoever is passing over has a sense, maybe, that they won't be forgotten. There's an old saying about you keep alive your loved ones by telling the stories of them.
Yes.
And I think that's very important for the person who is passing, that they won't be forgotten, that you could have any kind of legacy you want. You invented the electric car or whatever, but if you get forgotten, what is the point of all of that? If you don't have children and you don't have a traditional legacy to go forward, in your issue, as we would say in the law, then what do you have? And so to tell the stories of those who have gone on is part of the closure, so that they can know that someone somewhere is telling their story, is remembering their legacy. And for those who are still living, it puts us in touch with our own mortality. One day, we're going to be, as you said in your introduction, one day, we're going to be up at bat. And so as we are engaged in this process of death, of saying goodbye, of tying loose ends up, of forgiving what happened, of saying there are no more problems, we'll let bygones be bygones, then that allows us who are still living to live our lives a little lighter, a little better, without a regret. Because I think that's one of the things. We were both in military. And I think that's one of the hard struggles. You have a son or daughter who comes back from a war zone, and they're not in a condition to be viewed. And so what comes back is a body bag and a coffin, and you don't get to see. You don't get to see and know that that's my child, my son, my daughter, my whatever in there. So to tell those stories is the connection, is the tie.
Mm-hmm. That's
between
wonderful.
Us.
Now, we were both in the military and both on the medical side, and we both saw sudden and unexpected deaths. and the family never got to say goodbye. And oftentimes we were the last people to be with their son or daughter. And the family is haunted. And there's so many stories of the loved one wanting to come and communicate and say, I'm all right. What are some of the stories you've heard?
Oh, golly. You start from the place of you got to believe. You just got to believe. So often a spouse would say, I could feel my partner lie down in the bed beside me. I could feel a breeze. I could hear a voice. Something passed in a room, and I knew it was them. To let go of our feelings of, well, it's not scientific, you can't prove it, it's just my imagination.
Right.
To let go of that and allow them to be present. Again, the whole process of, so think about birth. The birth doesn't happen to one person. The birth happens to the mom, and the birth happens to the baby. And of course, there is the extended family. But the birth is kind of a two-way street in that sense. It's happening to both. Death is the same way. Death is happening to those who are present, to those who are not present. And in the event that you are not there, as my family was not to mom's passing, now dad was a different story. Other people were there. To recognize that these messages, these visitations, these whatevers, it's them. It's somebody saying, I love you. And I want you to know wherever I am, I'm okay. And I'm going to keep an eye on you. Again, a two-way street, like a dance.
Mm-hmm. And that is so important. In my case, my mother died and we were all there. But my father died and we weren't. And he was unexpected. My one brother and one sister were there. And his sister and her husband and a cousin. And they're talking. He was engaged in the conversation. And then he said, I'm tired. I'm just going to close my eyes. And he closed his eyes and he died. And he passed right then. And there's five of us children. So the three of us who weren't there had this intense, overwhelming guilt that we weren't there. We didn't get to say that goodbye at the end. And there was a big Italian thing, right? So 600 people were over 600 people were at the viewing, and 500 plus people. And the man's 90 years old. Even the priest said, we have funerals for 90-year-olds. We usually have like 15 people. We got 500 people in this church. And during the next couple of days as we were getting ready to go back home, there was this, I could feel my father, who didn't say much, basically, but he would always say, it's okay. Regardless of what happened, the world could be coming to an end, he always would say, it's okay.
It's okay.
And remember hearing that. I'm in the house, almost hearing his voice out loud saying, it's okay. Go on and do what you need to do. Don't worry. It's okay. And that story will be told as long as I live to my children, and I hope to their children. And it just perpetuates down the line, and we keep that alive. And I think you hit it right on the head with everybody wants to be remembered.
That's all. We just want to know that somebody knows us. Somebody who knew us knows us, and we haven't faded away like melting snow.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious.
Go ahead.
I'm curious to know, because of that story, and you raised the issue of the guilt for not being around. What what would you say to people who are in in that position where they didn't get a chance to say something, they parted on harsh terms, they whatever, that left them in a position of feeling that guilt, as you were talking about? What have you learned to say that might be of comfort to people in that situation?
Well, it was challenging, no question. And we had a good relationship, so there wasn't any hostility. We just weren't there at the end. And I think it comes down to, I've said, people have asked me that, and I've said, everyone has their time. And when it's their time, it's their time. And nobody asks you. You don't get to say when that is.
Do over.
Yes. So hopefully you have resolved what needed to be resolved. But if you hadn't, and there was still some friction and some tension, talk it. Speak, say the words out loud.
Yes.
And as you said before, they're still there. The spirit is still there. The spirit is still listening, and the spirit will communicate back to you, even if it's something as simple as a picture of them that's on the wall that falls.
I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I am grateful. So whether you stand at the gravesite, if they were cremated, you stand out in the world, you say it to an object that they loved. Absolutely. And to not lose the opportunity ahead of time. So when mom was really sick and we could see, that she was going downhill, there was a book that I brought home about preparing for death. And it kind of walked you through, if you have a loved one in this situation, what are the things that you can do? So how do you do some of the things that you and I have been talking about? And the children were not allowed to do that, again, because of this don't think of the devil. In that book, there is a question by someone who's dying and says, but what happens if I tie up all the loose ends and I say, I love you to everybody, and lo and behold, it's not my time. Don't I look stupid? No, you look prepared.
Yes.
You look prepared, and you look relieved, and you look like so many people with the unexpected death of COVID. Take the chance, take the opportunity to make your wishes known now.
Absolutely. That is such a key point. And I'm Italian, you're Polish. We both came from that hard ethnic background. And my dad was, you don't talk about it because then it'll happen, right? Yeah. You don't go to the doctor because then you're going to be sick.
And you're going to find
something, right? They're going to find something, right? I was fine till I went to the doctor. That kind of story, right? My mother was very much prepared everything because she knew my father wouldn't do it. So she had, here's where the life insurance is. Here's where everything, she had books of detail of where everything was and what to do, and to the point where what dress she wanted to wear and how she wanted, picture of how she wanted her hair done.
Oh, right. God bless her.
And my dad was thinking, why are you tempting the devil here? What? She said, because it's going to happen. Okay, it's going to happen. And it was so helpful. And there wasn't any of this, she was tempting fate. We knew what to do. And that's a big, important thing, having seen a lot of death, is what did they want? Because sometimes they won't talk about it. But if you know, then there's comfort. Even if you weren't there, there's comfort that this is what they wanted. I'm going to make sure that happens.
Well, it also helps. It gives a roadmap, if you will, especially if you have a large family. And you might have squabbles among the siblings as to who, mom liked me best, or I know what she wanted because of this, or I know what he wanted because of that, or to have it laid out. I mean, think about it. Go all the way back to birth. We get the crib ready. We get the this ready. We get the that ready. We have a party. We get the booties, blah, 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 blah. If, God forbid, it doesn't work out, we've made the preparations. We get involved in the preparations. And then we get involved in the next stage. So why wouldn't we prepare for death? Why wouldn't we do the same things that, especially with COVID? And how many people ended up on a ventilator and no one had the chance to ask them? I mean, early on, I said to my, get a will, get your will made, get your trust done, get your power of attorney, get all that paperwork done. So many attorneys don't have it. But I told my family, I said, in the event I got COVID, in the event that it got so bad that it was ventilator or not, I'm going the not route. Give my bed and give my ventilator to somebody else, somebody younger, somebody with a family, somebody whatever. How many people didn't have the chance to say, I want or I don't want? So kicking open the door to preparing for death is just like grappling with anything else that we're afraid of. And I'm reminded of a poem by David White, who's here in Langley on Whidbey Island. And his poem is just take the first step, the one that's in front of you, the one that you don't want to take. Take the first step.
I love that. And it's funny, Diane, because life is a cycle, and there's birth and then there's death, and it's all part of the cycle. And everyone's excited about the birth, and everyone's scared to death about the death. And we spoke on the last Zoom. It's not the end. It's not. Mark O'Brien, who we both know, had said, my father died. They threw dirt on him. Is that it? That can't be all. There's more. Yeah. And it's part of that belief you mentioned earlier. You have that belief that they're going to be with us, be it memories or things that are going to occur. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I walk often in the woods that are here, and there is such a cycle of life, as you mentioned, that you can see in our woods and our forests. And so you can see the little shoots, and you know that those shoots are going to grow up into saplings that are then going to grow up into big trees. And for whatever reason, whether it's a blowdown or weather or just aging of the tree, it'll fall over. But the tree that is there, as it begins to rot and go into the forest dirt, becomes a home for fungus and animals and little critters and all sorts of things that then will eventually create the little sprout that will go to the sapling, that will go to the tree. It's a constant. It is a constant. And so I look at that and think, if our lives are like that we were given the blessing of birth and we were able to get through as much of our life as we were allotted, as we were given, then when the end comes, that composting of our life is really what's going on. And we're giving life to something else. And we're still there. That tree is still there. It might not be in the same shape it was when it was tall and had leaves and everything, but it's still a tree in its treeness. Mm-hmm. And I think that's my belief, is that is people. They're there in their peopleness, even though it might be something we can't see. One thing I'll say quickly, because he's so important to my life, I follow in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh, who is the Vietnamese Buddhist monk. And he talks about this. You look at a piece of paper and you can see the cloud in it. You can see the rain. You can see the sun. And when you burn the paper, it's still there. I mean, the cloud, the rain, the sun, we're the same way.
Right.
We are. And so if we look at those who have gone on ahead of us, in some form, they are still there.
Exactly. Now, Diane, when we spoke, we talked about COVID, and you mentioned it earlier here. These stories have to be told. And we've had these mass deaths within a year and very little preparation. And the psychological impact on the family which we've touched on. But what about the healthcare professional? What's the psychological impact on them, and how do we tell that story?
That's a brilliant question. As a nurse, I knew that I was signing on to some death. Now, as a pediatric nurse for the entire, and you don't expect to be around death in pediatrics, but you are.
Yes.
And so healthcare providers, let's just focus on nurses. Healthcare providers, I anticipate, know that at some point in time, there's going to be death.
Yes.
But there's no way anybody could have prepared for death 10x. And usually, if you're lucky, not always, but usually there is somebody else at the bedside. You're not the only one holding that person's hand. Now, there have been cases, and I know that you and I both have experienced that, where we are the only person at the bedside. Maybe somebody's in isolation, maybe family hasn't been reached, and we are the only ones sitting there. But with COVID, you have nurses who are at the bedside of dying people nonstop.
Correct.
And maybe they were able to hold a cell phone to the ear of the person who was dying so that family members could say whatever it is that they wanted to say. But this just didn't happen, once a shift, once a week. This was a constant. And what I'd really like to do is find a way to collect those stories, to hold up not only what the nurses as heroes did, and we all recognize that, I hope.
Yes.
But also to say this is the part that they played in the transition. Their stories were changed just as much as the family who was letting go of the loved one. Their stories were changed just as much as the loved one who was passing with something that no one ever could have anticipated.
Correct.
As to the psychological impact, we're going to see that. I mean, we look at the wars that we're aware of, and PTSD, which we finally named.
Mm-hmm.
It was there in World War I. It was there in World War II. It was there in the Vietnam War. It was there with January 6th. It's there. So by telling the stories and holding a space to nurture the nurturers, we can give voice to the stories they are holding. And thereby, I hope, give some relief
Absolutely.
to what they've lived through.
So if you are a nurturer and you're watching this, send us your story. Send it to me, send it to Diane. We'll collaborate and put something together so we can get your story in your words out, because we pray to God we never have to go through this kind of a thing again. But let's be prepared, as Diane has been saying all along here. Let's be aware of the impact of something like this can have on a nurturer. So nurturers, send it in. Frank Zaccari. You can send it to my website, Gmail. You can send it to Diane, and we will put something together to tell your story.
That would be brilliant.
Let's
That
do
would be
that.
brilliant.
Let's put that together.
You've addressed the idea of hope too. Hope, imagination, motivation. We've got sorrow. We've got grief. We've got trauma. And on the other side of the scale, we're hopefully balancing it out with hope, with inspiration, with motivation, so that even if we don't have a COVID again, the stories will be shared because they are stories about us. So that's a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant collaboration, capital C. I'm in.
We'll do it. Now, Diane, you have a podcast. Tell us about this 60-second messages that you have out that are just amazing.
I do have a podcast. It's a baby podcast. It was launched April 1, 2020, just as COVID was shutting us all down. And the podcast is called Stories from Women Who Walk. And the idea is to invite women who were walking their lives while their life decided to walk them. And how did they pivot? What did they change out of that? How did their life shape up differently? What's their story? And the importance of that is, I believe we see and hear each other in others' stories. So to say, oh, wait a minute, that happened to me too, gives a sense of maybe hope that I'm not alone.
Mm-hmm.
So in addition to that, under the umbrella of Stories from Women Who Walk, I have a daily podcast called 60 Seconds. And it airs Monday through Friday. And the idea is to get into 60 seconds, a little bit of wisdom or a practical tip, some information, maybe sometimes just a little riffing, and wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Wisdom. So that someone who gets a little bit, 60 seconds in the morning, and there's beautiful music. My brother-in-law, Steve Shook, has played, that you walk away, that my intention is you walk away maybe pondering something, maybe uplifted, maybe smiling. Yeah. Just love that idea of being able to drop a little brightness. Mm-hmm.
If you haven't heard these 60-second messages, how would they find them, Diane?
Oh, let's see. So Stories from Women Who Walk is on Simplecast or any of your favorite podcast listening platforms. You can also find it on my website. My website is quartermoonstoryarts.net / is the podcast. And because I call myself a media company for engaged storyism, you'll also find a link to my blog, which is called, of all things, My Life as Compost.
Yeah. What a great name.
Well, the idea behind it was that sometimes we look at our lives as a whole bunch of orange peels and coffee grounds and cheese rinds. But really, when you put that all together and turn it over with a little bit of dirt, that becomes compost. And you take that compost as good fertilizer, you spread it on your garden, and lo and behold, you got flowers. So it's a way of saying, you know what? It's not all bad.
Correct.
I can turn this around.
It's wonderful. Now we're just about out of time, Diane, but with everything you've done and all the stuff you've accomplished in your life, what last words do you want to leave with the viewers today?
In 60 seconds, I would say that your founding story, the one that you've been telling yourself, is not all there is. There is a sequel to your founding story. And looking for a way to shape your story into a sequel gives you another opportunity at telling the story. And you got to tell your own story yourself, because if you don't, somebody else will.
Yes.
Tell your stories.
I love that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as I mentioned, we're just about out of time. I want to thank Diane one more time for this. This was just a incredibly inspirational story here, and a set of stories. Now, ladies and gentlemen, no matter what life throws at you, and as you've heard today, life is going to throw a lot at you. Please do 3 things. Look up, get up, and never, ever give up. Pick up the pieces, start moving forward. Better times and better people will come into your life. If you'd like more information about Diane, you can contact her at the website she mentioned, or contact me, and I will make sure it gets to her. If you are a nurturer, send in your story, and we'll put something together. You can see this show on ROKU TV or on my YouTube page, Frank Zaccari. If you go to YouTube, please subscribe. And let me leave you with this, as I do every week, ladies and gentlemen. None of us are in this alone. And the secret to walking on water is to know where the rocks are. And today, Diane showed us where many of those rocks are. Join me again next week. We'll discuss another life-altering event or near-death experience. Thank you.